So today we were just going to run through some of the changes that are coming out of Birmingham, different options that the schools have to consider, and where we can kind of provide some advice and guidance to the schools as they're going through this challenge, because these are big changes. Jane, do you want to just update how it feels from a school's perspective or the changes that are coming through from Birmingham with a move away from Oracle?
Yeah, I mean, obviously from my perspective in Birmingham, it's a lot of workload in a very short space of time with what appears to be very little, if any, support coming from the Birmingham team. We've had loads of information since May regarding the transition process, but very little progress. I mean, obviously, I know it was a big undertaking to get option appraisals, business case, and get it through to cabinet, etc. But I think we, as schools, we feel that we've been left a lot in the dark. We've not been able to get on with the transitioning as quickly as we wanted to. The other issue at the moment, obviously, from a financial perspective, is that we're now being told that because of the option that's been chosen, we have to go full checkbook, irrespective of do you want to or don't you want to.
Yes.
So it's how we can then transition and what are the stages that, I mean, for me, I'm looking at potentially saying it has to be the checkbook solution first. So we know that we've got a banking arrangement that we can then take on HR, payroll, and pensions, and know that we've got a full solution and who can work with us as regards which bank have we chosen, which MIS have we operating from. It's that timeline. Ideally, we want to have this in place before the financial year, so we know that we can start things fresh.
Yeah.
But obviously, timeline is against us. We've got Christmas coming up,
Yeah.
followed by Feb half term, followed by Easter, coupled with budget planning and end of year process. So timeline isn't our friend at the moment.
No, and a lot of the payroll companies that provide payroll software and bureaus are already filling up for transitions for April.
Yeah, and
And
obviously we want to be able to do dual transition if we can to do validation purposes and checks before we actually go live.
yes, I mean, I'll touch on how a lot of the payroll companies now do that parallel running, because it's much more efficient than straight parallel runs. And
Yeah,
now that most of the providers have got a very good solution as to how they do that.
that's
And
it.
I'll touch on that through, but timing is beginning to get a bit tight for an April
Yeah, and I
transition.
think the other issue from Birmingham's perspective is that they haven't given any assurances as regards pension
Yeah.
and the obviously moving over to a different provider, what the pension rates would be and things like that. And do we retain Birmingham's? I think there is still a little bit of mystery over that transition on pension side.
Yeah, so my read on pensions, again, I can touch on these later at the moment, is that because the employer still remains the county council, to the city
Yeah.
council, the LGPS employer rate will stay consistent within that.
Okay.
So it only at the point of academization, when it becomes a separate legal entity and you hive out
Yes.
this
Yeah.
those employees separately, do the actuaries determine a different percentage rate.
Right.
So
Yeah.
my read of it at the moment is that you will still maintain the city council LGPS employer rate, yeah,
Yeah.
which is not insubstantial in your part of the world anyway.
No, no, it's quite generous, and I think it's not helped school budgets, but obviously it's for individuals, it's quite good.
Yeah, absolutely. Good. All right. Well, if we can crack into a couple of the slides, but let's have it as a very open conversation, talking through the concerns you've got, Jane, Vic, around where we're heading. Okay. So
Yeah.
I just want to touch on, yeah, the upcoming changes. We're seeing the move coming through. My understanding is it goes to cabinet on the 15th of October for a final decision.
Yes.
But as you've noted, kind of changes for next year are time bound, and there
Yeah.
is still a thing to do. Certainly on payroll and HR, I there is a real opportunity to be able to put all of those services in place with one supplier. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But they should be considered as separate solutions to make sure you get the right elements, because payroll is fundamentally different to HR. And there are different providers that will provide different aspects of what you need. It may well be that there's a single supplier that can serve you well on both,
Yeah.
but a payroll solution is different to a HR solution. So
Yes.
we're going to run through those and then some of the risks that we're aware of in terms of doing the transition, where we've worked with schools before on transitioning away from current providers to new providers, just taking the risk out of that transfer process because you're busy. You're very busy already. Putting this on as an exercise to you where involved in these transactions is the transaction that is most personal to everybody, your payroll. You've got to get it right. And there isn't an option to get it wrong. We need to make sure we get it right and to manage the risk as we go through.
Yeah.
So when we look at HR within schools, these are the areas that typically fall within the HR system and advice piece. And so it isn't just the management of personnel record, it's the onboarding, the personnel files, keeping the records right, who's got the training in there. That becomes really important as we get further down the line and saying, how do schools develop their own pipeline for talent coming through? How are we managing their training needs? The performance records, so the appraisal process that we go through to clear that's important. That's all held in the system. Any ER case management work, so any disciplinary cases or grievance management, all needs to be held in there. Absence, and that's not just reporting, but the requesting side of it as well. How are you going to collate all those? Reporting on the workforce census. You may be holding a single central record already separately.
Yeah.
It may well be that you want to look at that as part of the HR solution to say, actually, we already have way too many data islands in schools, as I call them, different systems that don't necessarily talk to each other.
No.
Where's the single point of truth? And it may well be that you want to spec a HR solution that can look after your SCR as well.
Yeah.
And then when somebody leaves or on, off rolling, off boarding, when someone leaves the school as well, how do we manage that? So there's some fairly complex things in there that isn't just the HR service as in a transactional personnel record. It is those areas of advice that needs to be coming to as well. Payroll, you've already mentioned pensions. I'm just clicking my screen. You already mentioned pensions. That's clearly a major area of expertise that needs to be pulled on. The monthly payroll, the end of year certificate returns for the pension schemes, gender pay reporting, the HMRC submissions that need to go in on a monthly basis as well, because you become responsible for that. And we need to make sure that's all managed within the payroll system. What are your forecasts? I don't just mean the payroll cost through to the rest of the year, but if you've got people that are looking for forecasts around what's their maternity calculations going to, or what's a potential retirement cost and a capitalization cost going to be if someone's taking early retirement, they all need working through. And then just the administration around S&P claims and all the other types of leave and those claims that come back as well. So payroll can be a very, very vulnerable system. And where we see schools that try to do it themselves, and we do see some that do it themselves, it can often be cheaper, actually, but there's a very real vulnerability there that if your payroll manager goes under a bus, proverbially, what then happens to the other hundreds of payrolls that you need to get done that month? There's a real challenge in how we can build those payroll systems.
I think that's the deadlines as well with that. If you've got people that are term time only contracts and things like that with the smaller schools within Birmingham especially, they're not going to be there at key dates to do these transactions.
Yeah, indeed. And building that resilience into your system, making sure you pick a provider that can actually adequately give you that comfort is really key in the conversations moving forward. So when we're looking at how we procure, there's a couple of routes forward on this. BCC guidance as to what's stopping, and the document is out, and the document on 3rd of October talks around their business case, what they're doing and what you need to do. Effectively, they're saying in black and white, it's down to you to choose your appropriate solution, and they're effectively become gatekeeper on auditing and verifying you're still doing the right things rather than actually doing it for you. So it puts an awful lot of onus onto schools that are already busy and where there's been long-term reliance upon.
I think that's the other issue, is not just doing this piece of work, or projects, mini projects within a bigger project. It's also that the compliance side, which they're saying that they're going to keep as regards statutory, that is also going to come down to schools, because they're going to create spreadsheets and say, fill this in and prove that you're doing the job.
Yes. Yeah, they are. And hopefully that's where, if we get the procurement piece right, you can put a lot of those obligations onto whoever your system provider is going to be, because they should be capturing that data at the point it happens rather than having to come back to you and say, give us the evidence now. You capture it into the system, then the reporting can be somewhat automated. Need to concern your own regulations. You talked around crossing the tender thresholds already, but what are your own regulations you've got within your financial procedures, and making sure we are consistent with those, and your governor's expectations on how you're going to be working. one of the biggest choices you're going to have to make is, do you go down the route of just buying straight off a framework, or do you go and procure your own
Yeah,
services? And that's where the next slides get into, really, is the differences between the frameworks. I know that buying for schools are going to be giving an awful lot of information to you as well over the coming days and weeks over their services and how they can help through those frameworks.
yeah.
But you shouldn't forget the opportunity of directly going to
Sure,
market,
no,
because that can work better in some occasions.
yeah,
How do we manage the transfer of data? Yeah, it is hugely personal data. It's hugely sensitive data, and it's also, if we get it wrong, there's all
yes,
kinds of problems down the line. So how do we make
yeah.
sure we
And I
actually?
think that's another issue in Birmingham, is that because of Oracle, we're not too sure of what data is going to be exported.
Yeah,
We need to validate that data first before obviously importing it into a new system.
we do, and we see it time and time and time and time again when schools convert to academy status. That checking of the data that's held
Yeah,
often yields really numerous errors through no fault of anybody's other than passage of time, and it hasn't been checked over
yeah,
time. And getting that right is a real body of work, particularly when you come down to, it's dead easy to write out to your staff and say, here's what the record shows.
yes,
Please check it's right. And most people will reply really quickly to you. But where they come back to you and say, well, no, my continuous service date's wrong.
yeah,
How do you then get the right evidence to prove
yes,
that? Because the obligation's on you to make sure that someone hasn't
yeah,
just said they started working in public sector in 1965.
yeah,
It's, how do we get that evidence back? And that's a real challenge on validating that data. It is important. You've mentioned the parallel testing side of it.
yeah,
I'll touch on the testing piece as well. So if we go back and run through those. So on the frameworks and versus tendering, we have the BCC, a guidance down towards the purchasing for schools framework. You're aware of the various frameworks?
yeah. We haven't got the details. I mean, obviously the information online, but they've set up a webinar to talk to the DfE.
Yeah, which is tomorrow, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, I've lost track of how many webinars I've got this week. So
There's lots.
yeah, there is something going on.
There is. So there's frameworks out there. A framework is essentially an organization that's gone to market
Yeah,
to create a lot that you can call off against to be able to
yeah,
kind of procure, saving you the challenge of going through the procurement regulations.
yeah,
And so therefore it's compliant, right? So you can have comfort that if you buy through that route, it's a compliant procurement. That's
yeah,
helpful. That's worth a lot in terms of how you feel.
yeah,
However, it is a restricted market because you're only being able
yeah,
to buy from the people that are actually on their framework, which means
yes,
any new providers to the sector or people that didn't get onto their framework that might actually be the perfect match for you
yeah,
might not be on that framework. So it's a bit like going to a mortgage broker that doesn't offer whole of market.
no,
You're getting the people that they have done the deals with already
yes,
and doing that,
yeah,
but it works. But similarly as well, depending on the framework that they use, you'll often be restricted down to the core services they've got in place within that framework. So what have they actually let the framework for on those
yeah,
areas? So you lose a little bit of the freedom of being able to do what you need, which is the point I make around tendering and doing it yourself. You can specify exactly what you want.
yeah,
And yeah, right down to the bottom point on that list of bullet points, they're your standards. So
yeah,
how quickly do you want things to come through? What is the SLAs you want to have in place? How do you want the workflows to work for you? And you get the benefit of going to the full market, and
yeah,
that gives you the full flexibility in what you purchase, rather than being bound by the constraints of a framework. As free as they are, there are still there. Doing it yourself allows you to purchase the system that you want.
yeah,
There are some caveats to that, and the hardest part of that is compliant procurement, but that's where we and others come in that kind of do that on your behalf to make sure
yeah,
that it is compliant, rather than asking you suddenly to understand the regulations, EU
yeah,
regulations 2015 on procurement exercises. People can take that risk away from you and make sure it's still a compliant exercise. Were
yeah.
you aware of it's a management information system rather than HR payroll, but did you see United Learning Trust and the Arbor and Bromcom fight a couple of months ago?
I think there was some sort of legal case, wasn't there, about restrictions being imposed and things.
Yeah, it was down to the compliant procurement piece. So Arbor and Bromcom, the two largest suppliers in the MIS space.
Yeah,
Bromcom took umbrage with the fact that the contract was ordered to Arbor and said it hadn't been done compliantly.
yeah,
And yeah, we are seeing this increasingly, that suppliers are becoming more litigious around the procurement exercises because education is a massive market,
yes,
and we can expect, within the changes coming in Birmingham, that there's going to be an awful lot of suppliers hawking around for your interest
Yes.
and turn around and say, well, actually, have you done that right? And therefore we deserve the contract. You
Yes.
see an awful lot of that coming through, and getting the compliant right, getting the compliant.
I think that's where we're coming from. As I said to you before Vic joined, is we've had tentative information coming through from some suppliers, but it's making sure that we know what we want as a specification first.
Yes.
Otherwise, we've got no consistency.
No, and that's where we do a lot of work with schools is that piece of going, what do you want? And let's go and procure something for you that is entirely compliant, but gets you exactly what you need, and you're not having the compromises in place of saying, well, here's a mass framework that can work for 90% of people. You're getting the solution that works 100% for you.
Yeah.
So that is a real advantage of kind of doing it yourself under the tendering process. And then in terms of the risks, the legislation piece, the procurement piece is there, but then you've got all the other risks and legislation that come through in terms of payroll costs, in terms of the HR advice and guidance, the changes to employment legislation, making sure that whatever system you get comes through with that.
Yeah.
What are the challenges with outsourcing away from the local authority, which is a very inclusive service? You know, they do an awful lot for you.
Yes.
Is that you will have an SLA with whoever your supplier is.
Yeah.
And if something that you need falls outside that SLA, is it going to get done? And that's a real challenge. And then as legislation comes through, are they going to proactively advise you and work with you to make sure you've got the relevant changes in place, particularly around policies? And this gets onto the HR advisory piece. There's often a lot of hidden costs with this transition. It's the time piece mostly. It's your time, it's your colleagues' time going through the validating of the data, checking it through, making sure it's right. But then once the SLA is in place, if you need something doing, take for example on payroll, if you gone through a payroll process, it's been approved, and then you realize there's actually an error in there and you want payroll rerunning, several of the providers will charge you 100 quid to rerun the payroll. And it's just being aware of those costs and what that is that builds out in there.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're needing to report on gender pay reporting, or you're needing to fill in your school workforce census return, you want to outsource that, there's often costs associated with putting that data out. And so it's thinking around those things up front rather than just taking the rate card system, because a lot of suppliers will have you over the barrel. You've signed up for a core services and maybe not school for workforce census return.
Yes. And
then you'll turn to them 3 weeks before and they go, oh my goodness, I need to file this in 3 weeks. And they'll go, okay, you've got no options. You've got to pay our rate card price. And it's just being aware of what those costs are as you build out your requirements.
Yep.
Looking at the resilience, and you've mentioned already a couple of suppliers looking at working with you. What's the backup of the people that you're potentially going to be working with? How resilient are their systems? Have you heard of Dataplan?
Yes.
Yeah, so Dataplan, fairly large payroll company. I've advocated for them for years, to be honest. They've been really, really good over many moons. However, a couple of years ago, a different local authority went through exactly the same as Birmingham were doing, and Dataplan picked up an awful lot of customers at the back end of that.
Yeah.
But they didn't have the capacity in-house, and they'll openly admit this now. They didn't have the capacity in-house to give the right level of service.
Yeah.
And then there was an awful lot of concern at the time that some schools may not actually get payroll processed in time in the month because they just weren't being done, or they were full of errors.
No.
And so as you go through this exercise, particularly we see schools like to work, you've already mentioned earlier, Jane, in terms of working with a school next door.
Yeah.
If everybody does that, can the providers upscale their resilience quick enough to take away the risk?
And I think that's what Birmingham, there's a lot of queries going through on the networks and that, saying, well, do we have to go with the same supplier? Can we choose our supplier? What happens if X number choose Y supplier? Have they got the capacity to undertake all of this transitioning? Yeah,
absolutely. I think that is a very real concern that I think you and others need to bear in mind. And what others do is not your problem, but the impact on what others do on you might be your problem. And therefore that stress testing as we go through the exercise of saying, what is the resilience? What's the capacity? What's the SLA guarantees? And building in penalty clauses for non-delivery, etc., is all ways of protecting you.
Yeah.
And that's really important. Just recognizing that HR and payroll aren't the same. And you can very effectively have a HR system, not the advice piece, but you can have a HR system and a payroll system that are separate, but do talk to each other.
Yes.
There's a huge amount of specialism within payroll that isn't always picked up in a HR system. So if you go to market, you will get different providers coming to you and saying, we can do everything.
Yeah.
They may well be able to. but actually there may well be specialist payroll providers that can give you a better service on payroll, and a specialist provider on HR that can give you a response on HR. The
Yeah.
key thing is how we make those systems play, so you get that one point of truth,
Yes.
and you haven't got the data islands that, the bane of schools' lives, where you're
Yes.
entering data into multiple different systems. It's that
Yeah.
opportunity almost, and there is something quite exciting around this in terms of an opportunity for you to say, how do we get that single point of truth? Where's your identity system held?
Yes.
How does that run through to your workforce census? Because that's important. How does it run through to your single central record? Because that should be seamless.
Yeah.
How does that link through to your payroll? Does your payroll link to your HR and your absence? Does your absence records flow through to your payroll systems?
Yeah.
And there's actually a time saving that could be had if we get it right on yours and your colleagues' time
Yeah.
on making those procedural changes
Yeah.
in the way the school works. As always, with any system change, getting the specification right up front is really important.
It is.
And that's where I'd urge you just to be really conscious of, put the legwork in up front, because it will pay you dividends many, many times over once you get to
Yeah.
implementation. If we shortcut the specification and getting the workflows right,
Yeah.
then you're going to be living with that problem down
Yeah.
the line for a long time. And
I think the benefit for us, well, I'll say benefit, we have got like a KPI document from BCC when
yeah,
they sent out one of the SLAs a while back. I think might be 2 years old now, but at least that documents each of those stages and what the compliance should have been. It's what we held them to account for, and got a 10% discount in 1 year because they didn't comply.
yeah, good.
So
And that kind of penalty clause is something we should be building into the
yeah,
contracts, to make sure that that is there. But also what it does for you, making sure it's actually doing what you want it to do, and that you're not then having to create a workaround once you've gone live with the
yeah,
system if it's not doing something that you wanted it to do. It is that kind of wireframing out and saying, what do you want it to do? Which is the next point of, make the system work for you and not working for the system.
yes,
We seem to have a psyche in humanity, don't we, of going, well, the computer says no.
yeah,
The computer's just zeros and ones.
yeah,
Let's make it work for us, rather than us having to adapt entirely to the system. Now, there may well be some processes in the school that you want to change to make it right for you.
yeah,
But if the system isn't making it work for you, well, let's change the way the system works
yeah.
and get it to work for you. And so there's an exciting opportunity here to turn around and say, well, actually, so what are the frustrations that you've had with BCC?
That's
And
it.
let's see if we can kind of just make them a little bit easier.
Yeah, definitely.
And then just pick up on the time and the focus, because you're busy. And procurement of payroll, HR, finance systems, whatever else,
Yeah,
wasn't on your to-do list for the year going back into March, April time, was it? And you've got a whole full life of school activity in
yeah,
place. It just does take up a huge amount of time. And the next video on this is just kind of a bit of a humorous anecdote on that, just to kind of show you where focus
yeah.
is.
Okay.
So just watch this suite in the middle. Okay, there's a American talking over this at the moment, so just watch that suite in the middle. It's
Yeah.
going to be put under the middle cup, and they're going to move it around. I just want you to keep your eye on where that suite is. Where is it?
I'm going to say the one on the left.
On the left. You sure?
I got lost.
Yeah, I got a bit lost in it, but I'm thinking the one on the left. But then I'm also saying, well, how do I know there wasn't sweets under all of them at the beginning?
Well, there wasn't.
Yeah,
On the
I
left,
think
right?
it might be back in the middle.
Yeah, so it's in the middle there. But yeah, that's just 3 suites. Now let's make it a bit harder.
Oh no, no, no.
Okay? So exactly the same. The suite's going to go in the middle pink one, okay? But there's an extra person on the
Moving.
screen, and we've obviously got 9 cups now as well. Yeah, but same task. Okay, where is it?
I'm going to say left again.
Left again.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
on the left. Yeah.
On the left, okay. And you're both right, well done.
Yay.
Right? But this is example in kind of focus and keeping attention on there, because I've asked you to follow that suite, okay?
Yeah.
Did you see the duck?
No.
No.
Right? That, I promise you that was there on the first video.
Oh, Dick, no.
Okay? And I'm not
That's
done with you.
terrible.
And I'm not done with you yet. There's a fifth hand.
Pardon?
Ah,
And you know what? I'm still not done with you.
oh no.
The blue cups became green.
Oh no. Right.
How the hell did they do this?
They just swapped the blue ones out for green.
Oh,
Okay. But what it says before we get onto this thing, but I use that video as a really good example of focus.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a limited number of us on the screen right now. And I was asking you to look at one thing on your 13:9 size screen or whatever size you're watching it on. And you didn't see the other stuff that actually, if you were to go back and if I would say to you, look for weird stuff that happens around that screen, you'd probably see them.
Yeah.
But it's a really good example of how busy you get and how focused you get on your day-to-day stuff. That if we get entirely focused on this project, what gives in your school that you miss?
Yeah.
And that's a real risk for us as we go through this exercise, is to kind of go, well, actually, how can you make sure you keep your focus on the areas where you need it to be? And yes, you need some focus on making sure we get the right systems in place, but you need to focus on the day job as well. And that's where finding the right partner to work with you on this is really, really important, because you need that focus to make sure you can frame up, this is the project, these are the outcomes we want. Someone go and focus on doing that.
Yeah.
Without you being distracted by 1,000,005 things. Because whilst that video is a bit of fun, it does contain a really, really important point in that as humans, we are all really frail. You see the thing that's most important to you at the point in time, and you don't always see the stuff around the periphery of your vision. So the final part really is just picking up on that HR system versus the HR advice, and they are different as well. So you're going to need to buy a new HR system. That's fine. We can do that as a very simple project.
Yeah.
But the advice part and the other HR service you get from the LA at the moment is really key to kind of say, what do you want from that? If you're needing a transactional service, so someone that's issuing the contract, someone that's keeping the core records up to date, etc., and is writing letters for you, let's make sure that gets specified out as well. But then where are you going for the advice, and where are you picking that up from? And not every school can afford to have a level 7 CIPD professionally qualified person at their beck and call.
No.
And that's where buying that strategic retainer support is really helpful, where you're buying X number of days per year that's there, in much the same way that you'll have at the moment in the contract that you'll have with the authority, is where does that strategic advice come in and get that through? You tell me your experience around Birmingham, and this isn't critical of them as well, but is their advice really generous advice, or is it working for the benefit of the school?
As I said before Vic joined, I said it's one of those we had already looked at potentially coming out of CCHR because of the lack of advice, guidance, information. It's there on the portal, go and find it. And we hadn't got a named advisor, or the named advisor we was given was always on a leave point, a key points in the year. So for me personally, this is where the issue is going to come, that the system will be what we need it to be because of specification, but issuing of contracts, issuing of advice that is linked to BCC red tape is going to be the difficulty part.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the core part for us to really get around to being what's right. And we typically see this is the area of challenge for schools that are moving away to a different HR services, getting that right level of support that's there.
Yeah.
And walking away from what is the status quo to what do you want it to be. And that's a real hurdle to cross, to kind of say, what is it you want that's in place to be able to do that. And that's where getting the right provider working alongside you is really important. And the final point is just find an advisor you can trust as you walk through that process. And as much as this is a general webinar, there's an element of, we do this, And
Yeah.
this is what we do. Part of our stock in trade is working with schools and trusts to walk through what is it you need, and then being that kind of honest broker that's got the
Yeah.
laser focus on the project to kind of say, this is what you need for your school, because
Yeah.
that's what we've
Yeah.
talked to you about. We've worked through, we've triaged out what it is you need. Get us to go to market and find that service for you.
Yeah.
But certainly then on the HR side, we do actually provide that transactional and advice piece as well through a full team of CIPD fully qualified people, backed by all the legal backing that you get from any of the other providers there. And it's not just us, there are multiple providers out there.
Yeah.
But specifying what it is that you want. And I guess the great thing about Keystone is, as you kind of know about us, we're all school people. We've all been in your seats.
Yes. Yeah.
In school. So we're not shiny consultants trying to make £1 million. We're
No.
actually still people that want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And that's where we can kind of bring a real empathy to it as well.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. So any questions on that so far? And good conversation, James, before Vic started and throughout. So thank you.